The time has come to get back to the Gospel of John. Yeah, your Q meter is really low right now. But just a little bit in the way of reminder, because some of you have joined us since the Gospel of John. And so to catch up those who weren't a part of the earlier part of the series, we've been going at it for, golly, coming on a better part of January will mark 2 years that we've been through the Gospel of John. And honestly, that's, yes, we took the summer off, but that's actually going through the Gospel at a very fast clip because there is so much in it. What has been said about the Gospel of John, because whenever somebody comes to know Jesus, people say, well, just read the Gospel of John. And the reason why they say that is because it's kind of written more in everyday language. But the challenge is, so what's been said is that the Gospel of John is shallow enough to wade in, but deep enough for an elephant to swim. And that's absolutely true. There is so much depth to this. There's so much that's said and so much that's behind the scene. The Gospel of John and the book of John, both, or the books of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, are written by John himself, the apostle. And his Greek is really good. So when you take a Greek class, which I'm sure most of you have in Bible college, they go through the Johannian literature. There you go, big words just for you. The words that John wrote, whether it's in the gospel or in the letters, are written with good Greek. If you go to the gospel or the letters of Paul, not quite so much. It was a little bit more difficult to interpret the letters of of Paul and others compared to John. And so I was reminded as I was talking with my bride about this the other day, is that part of my Greek final was a 4-hour final to translate the Gospel of John. And I kind of sweat just a little bit, and that was like 36 years ago or something crazy. And so we won't get into it in that kind of depth. But I did want to take some time, and we'll get into this a little bit, to get into how John uses certain words, specifically one word in the gospel. But so John is a different gospel. If you read through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're kind of more of the what of Jesus and what he did. There's a lot of synonymous places where they're recording the same miracle. They're recording some of the same words. It might be in a different place, but there's a lot of paralleling in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Later, John was written. John knew that this was there, but there is so much to be said about who Jesus is. There's so much to be said about how he exists and his character and nature and things that weren't said. The who wasn't spelled out like John does, and the why, that we might believe. In the first chapter of John, in verses 4 and then again in 12, it's all about that we might believe. And in fact, we have in John 20, in kind of a summary statement towards the end of the gospel, these are written that you may what? Believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. The Gospel of John was written to basically everybody. The Gospel of Matthew was written with a Jewish audience in mind. The Gospel of Mark was written with a Roman audience in mind. The Gospel of Luke was written with a Gentile audience in mind. And that's why they cover different things. They paint with different colors. And so it gives us just a more full thing. People will point to some of the passages in the Gospels and say, see, they kind of contradict each other. But when you lay them all next to each other, the resurrection accounts and all these different things, they don't contradict. They just paint with more color so that we have a more full picture. And they painted with those colors intentionally for the audience they were writing to. Do you feel smarter now? I don't know. But it's so important. And this idea, this foundation of believing is something that's repeated over and over through the Gospel of John. Not just a knowing about him, but this word gnosko is not just knowing about him, but it's understanding from a place of intimacy. It's an understanding from a place of connection. And we're going to really dive into that today. Not just knowing about him. Because our knowing drives believing. And believing is seen in doing. That's really what happens. That's the natural process. As we grow as believers, as we grow in our understanding of him, it helps us to be more and more founded in our belief. In the early days, the honeymoon phase of marriage, right? I mean, she said she was committed to me. She said that she was going to love and honor and do all these things that we shared at the altar, and I believed it. Not that I didn't believe it, I did believe it, but as I saw it in practice, as I saw it being put into play in our everyday life, in the tough times, in the great times, in the confusing times, in the challenging times, I see it put into place, and my knowing that drives my believing. It's a different kind of believing. Now I know you told me you love me, but now I believe it like I've never believed it before. It's the process that happens that I pray never dies. We've been married for 35 years, and I'm still growing in my love for my bride. Some of you are like, 20 or 35 years, you're such a pup, you know. I love that. I love that we have enough people that have been married longer than me to make me feel a little bit younger. But I know most of you have been married probably less, but whatever. This knowing that drives believing. The Gospel of John kind of finished up in the first 12 chapters the ministry, the recorded ministry of Jesus and what he did. The miracles that he did, the signs is how John approaches it. All the miracles Jesus did pointed to a characteristic of who God is. That's why John called them signs. You can go back, you can look at previous sermons, whatever. But in chapters 13 to 17, we have this amazing special discourse that Jesus has with his disciples. It's special because he knows that the time is short. So those 12 chapters cover about 3.5 years, depending on how you do the math. But these last chapters from 13 to 21, or to 20, it really encapsulates just weeks, a short amount of time. Chapters 13 to 17 captures hours of time. But these are words Jesus finally has with just his disciples. These words of intimacy. They were words where he was explaining the much deeper things. And it starts with him washing their feet. And all 12 of them are there. Jesus washes all of their feet, including the feet of Judas. He gives communion the first time that we know now as communion, and he shares it with his disciples, and he shares that communion with all 12, with Judas as well. And the reason I emphasize that, because Jesus also predicts that he would be betrayed. And in that time, right on the heels of him saying that, the disciples were like, would it be me? Is it me? How could it ever be me? And Jesus says, the one whom I dip and give this to will betray him. And he dips and he hands to Judas. Judas gets up and leaves. And Jesus says, whatever you do, do quickly. And it was so out of the box. It was so out of the mind of the people that were in that room. They still didn't get it. In fact, they said amongst themselves, maybe Judas, because he had the purse, he was the treasurer. Maybe he was going out and buying something for the meal. Maybe he was going out and helping somebody, as was tradition during Passover. Maybe they still didn't even in that moment when Jesus said, the one whom I dip and give this to, it will be the one that betrays me. They still didn't even get it because, well, we'll get into that more. So all of this is happening in this moment. And over these chapters, we see these words. And it's interesting, as we mentioned earlier going through the series, as Judas left, Jesus seemed to shift gears in what he was teaching, what he was saying. They were more intimate words. They were closer words. They were words that he was giving to the ones that he was equipping and preparing to go out and do what they had no idea they were going to be asked to do in just hours, really. Their whole world was going to turn upside down. Upside down. This new commandment that Jesus was giving in John 14, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. The new part of it is, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. John gets into that more deeply in the next section, and starting in verse 12 of chapter 15. But for today, we're going to do a deep dive into 15. And as I look at my notes and as I've been pondering it, I think I'm going to do something I have never done before. You know that I'm really big on always sticking to the script, right? But there's something I have never done before. Jerry's giving me this look like, what is this? I'm not sure I'm going to hit all of this message today, because there's so much there. In fact, in planning out the message, as you know, as we've been going through John, that when you start digging, you're like, ting, 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 and you're finding more things. And it's like, oh, we got to unpack this, not because I'm trying to bleed it to death, but because I want us to absorb what's being taught here. Now, this is why it's a little different, because as I was putting out the process of how I was going to go through these, next week I'm not going to be here. And so I have verses 1 to 11 to hit today, and then Tom is going to teach on 12 to 17. Well, guess what? We may end up doing 1 to 11, 12 to 17, back to 1 to 11 for just a little bit. We'll see. We'll see. Because there's so much here. So the last few words of Jesus in John 14, and it has bearing on how we intro this message today in John 15, is he says the last few words in John 14, rise, let us go from here. So they have this conversation that Jesus has with them in the upper room, and now they're in transition. They're in transition to where would go to the Garden of Eden, right? Garden of Eden. The Garden of Gethsemane. Different garden altogether. Different story, Bill. Other side of the Bible. All right, fine. Sorry. It's funny what just kind of flies out of your mouth sometimes. You know that? It's only different when you have people looking at your face going, you're wrong. But anyway, so as they're walking along, as they're going from that place, from that upper room, and they're walking along the way, Jesus often used what was going on around to be able to teach lessons, right? And as he's walking along the way, he probably came along a vineyard, which is normal. Vineyards were in that area a lot. And as they were walking to the garden, he probably saw this vineyard. And this is why it matters. John 15, starting in verse 1. Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser, or the gardener, some translations say. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. See? How do you cover that in one chunk? I am the true vine, Jesus says. My Father is the vine dresser. The word picture there would have been very, very clear to the people of Israel. Even in Herod's temple, there was a gold vine that was displayed as part of the temple decor. And it symbolized several places, at least 7 in the Old Testament, where the nation of Israel was described as the vine. In Isaiah chapter 5, there is this, what's called the Song of the Vineyard. And it starts with, I'm planting this choice vine. I'm setting up a tower. I'm doing all that's necessary for this vine to thrive. God himself planting the choicest of vines to do everything it needs to thrive and to grow. But the sad part of that song is he comes back and all it had produced was wild grapes, little grapes, useless grapes. They were sour. They were not usable. In fact, all of the different references to vine in the Old Testament, we see the same in Jeremiah. We see this illustration in the book of Hosea, chapter 10, verse 1, where he talks about this vine had spread and it had produced all this fruit. But what that abundance of fruit led to was idolatry. They had so much. I know we can't relate to that in American culture. So much they didn't know what to buy. So they just kept on buying stuff. And their whole wealth became a stumbling block to them. They became idol worshipers, worshiping the stuff and not the provider. So every reference in the Old Testament when it came to vines wasn't really all that good. I'm not even sure why Herod put that on the temple at all, because it would be a constant reminder. Now there are some great places in Psalm, I think it's Psalm 127, where it says that the fruit of a woman is like a fruitful vine of the grape and all that. I mean, there are some positive references in general, but specifically of the people of Israel, it wasn't a good reference. So as they're walking along the way, after being taught by Jesus, and they're seeing these vines, Jesus says something revolutionary. He says, I am the true vine. He's redeeming all of those references to what was not. He's redeeming all the references to what could have been, but they made bad choices. He refers to himself as the true vine. What God was intending to do with the people of Israel, to show the world of his goodness, of his mercy, of his love, of his compassion, of his provision, that his house would be a house of prayer for the nations. They did not do that. But Jesus, as the true vine, will fulfill what the vine was supposed to do from the beginning. That's pretty awesome. It's beautiful in its picture. I am the true vine, true meaning in every respect, real and true and genuine. Jesus, the perfect picture of God. Could I have said that more clearly? The perfect picture. Because he absolutely is. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, it says, he, meaning Jesus, is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. The exact imprint of his nature. One of the things we talked about as we were covering Revangelized was the doctrine of the Trinity and the deity or the godness of Jesus. This is a great reference to that he is the exact representation. The Greek there says undistinguishable, the exact representation. It was a claim of the godness of Jesus. So I am the true vine, my Father is the vine dresser, the gardener. He points to the intentional, close, and skillful work of God. It's easy to read the contrast between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's like the Old Testament was about God and a bunch of people who didn't get it right and God punishing them. And man, the Old Testament, God's grumpy, and we've talked about that, joked about that a little bit. It's not true, but that tends to be our perception. And then in the New Testament, it's all about Jesus and how he, smelled flowers and had babies on his knee and had birds coming to him. And, that's kind of the picture that so many people can have. But what Jesus is saying here is that God is still actively involved in our lives. He didn't just fulfill his promise in Jesus and let Jesus kind of like he's the quarterback and handing it to Jesus and Jesus takes the ball and runs with it. They are still both very much, including Holy Spirit, working in our lives every day. They are all very much alive and active in our lives. I love that. Jesus is the vine. God is the perfect gardener. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. It's really interesting to read because I like to read commentators that come at passages from lots of different angles, right? As you dig deeper, you find that there are some different schools of thought. And they tend to go under two main theological categories. And one says that God is sovereign, nothing can change God's will, that we are predestined, that we don't really have a choice, that all that happens by God's sovereignty in our lives, really, we don't have much, it's just God doing his thing. Like we're chess pieces moved on the chessboard by God's total sovereignty. And on this side, it's all about our free will. And not that God isn't sovereign, because of course we can't deny that, but it really depends on me. And my faithfulness determines everything. And in some ways, it's tough in this, but what ends up over here is insecurity of faith, because I don't know by the end of my life if I'm going to be good enough, if I'm going to do things right enough, if I'm really, what if somebody cuts me off in traffic and I swear at him and Jesus comes back? There was a preacher in chapel at Northwest College of the Assemblies of God, and this preacher said this. He said, "Do you mean to tell me that if someone cut me off in traffic and I swore at him and Jesus returned, would I miss the rapture?" He said, "Yes." Huh. I don't know that every Assemblies of God pastor would have agreed with this one. But this guy, I'm not going to name who he was. He was a very well-known preacher way back in the day, in the 80s, before some of you were born. And over here, so here we have extreme insecurity. Over here we have kind of lethargy. We have God's going to do it all anyways. We can almost be like Eeyore, oh, whatever. God's going to do whatever he wants anyway. Where can we find a balance in that? The reason I bring that up, it's interesting to read these verses in John 2. He cuts off every branch, or he takes away every branch that doesn't bear fruit. Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that will be even more fruitful. So The ones on this side say, see, he cuts them off and he throws them away because they've lost their salvation. And over here, they say, he's not even talking about salvation at all. He's talking about, well, they weren't believers, blah, 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 blah. And there's this somewhere, what's this really saying? So I did some deep diving in all this. And I was finding some things that were kind of insightful and encouraging to me. And I hold it like this, okay, because God is sovereign. I hold it like this. But there's some interesting things. Because what we do know is there are some very clear passages that those who are in Christ are totally safe and secure. We covered this before in John 10. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them. They will, and they follow me. I give them eternal life. They will what? Never perish. And how many? No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. There are some pretty clear passages that those who are in Christ don't have to worry about whether they're saved today but not tomorrow. Oh, I just swore at that guy and I've asked forgiveness, but I hope that he doesn't return in between the swearing and the asking. I mean, our relationship with God is so much more secure than that. But interestingly, this word takes away in the Greek is airo. Not like arrow, but A-I-R-O, arrow. Take away is one of the common translations of that, but there's also the translation of take up, which is interesting. Like when Jesus said to the leper, or not the leper, but the one who was healed, take up your mat, right? And there's also like other instances. There's 35 references in the New Testament of this word being translated take up. Now, context is really important. Context is really important. And so in the idea of what do they call those things, the gardeners? As they're pruning, right? The vinter, the vine dresser. There is this connotation. But also with a gardener, what do they do with branches that don't get enough sunlight? What do they do with vine dressers that don't get enough sunlight? What do they do with those branches? They lift them up and they support them. They put them in a place where they can get more light. That's what they do. So I'm pondering this and I'm having this moment with God behind my computer and I'm like, wow. That is pretty awesome. Now, verse 6 that we'll get to in a minute, verse 6 it gives a further picture of something that I think is a little bit unrelated, and this is why I believe this to be true. I believe that it very well could be that Jesus is talking about God being the gardener to lift up, to tie up, to hold up these branches that they may be fruitful. They were in the shade. They were not in a place where they could bear fruit. And so God lifts them up and ties them into that place as the gardener. I'm skipping over so many things. How many gardeners do we have in the room? Do we have some gardeners in the room? Do you love to prune? Some of you love to prune. What are you pruning when you prune a branch or a vine? What are you pruning? Dead stuff? What else are you pruning? Disease? What else do you prune? What? Wild? Yeah. Like suckers, right? Like in an apple tree, the things that grow straight up. I always knew that. The things that grow, you want to cut them off in our blueberry bush, because they take energy that is unnecessary. They're not going to bear fruit, and so they're pruned. So we have this picture of a gardener who is bearing up. We have a picture of a gardener that's pruning so he can create more area for the sun to reach these berries, the grapes, so that the grapes would be more sweet, that the grapes would mature better, that they would be a more abundant crop. So the energy wasn't going towards these suckers, it was going towards the fruit. It wasn't just creating shade, it was opening it up for sunlight. I remember that even with maple trees. You want to get the stuff out in the middle so that the light can go into the middle and it's all fun and dandy. And can I just brag on my wife for a minute? Total side note, but total praise. Homeschool high five for that. We were pruning our huge oak tree in our front yard and our huge maple. And I'm just grateful for her because we brought all these branches down. The one thing that you have to figure out is like, okay, there's a burn ban, at least there was. I don't know if it still is. It's wearing just a little bit. There was at the time. And but our neighbor had some trees. Gosh, I don't even know why I'm telling you this story, but I am. Our neighbors had some trees cut down, and they were throwing all of those in the chipper, and we had all these branches, and so she had this great idea of just how much could we pay this guy just to chip all our branches. That was just awesome. It has to do with pruning, but it has nothing to do with the message, except that my wife is awesome. Have you ever experienced the pruning in your own life? Have you ever experienced pruning of dead stuff and you're kind of glad it's gone? Like, okay, I'm glad that's gone. I'm glad I'm not there anymore. I'm glad I'm not in that place anymore. Have you also had things that felt really good cut away? It's like, wow, it was green. It had leaves. It was awesome. But it wasn't going to bear the kind of fruit that God has called you to bear. So sometimes even good things in our lives, sometimes even things you're like, oh, that could be a great thing. You know, you get a job offer and you're like, oh, is that good? And all of a sudden you don't get the job and you're like, oh, but then you find out maybe you're going to thrive more in your current position than you would have in that new place. You know what I'm saying? He cuts off, or he prunes every branch that does bear fruit so that it will be even more fruitful. Why? Because the gardener knows exactly what he's doing. And we can trust him in that. That's where understanding the sovereignty of God is so important. Even when we make stupid decisions, he, in his grace and his goodness and his sovereignty, is molding and shaping and pruning and guiding us that we would be even more fruitful. I love that about God. I'm so grateful that God does that in our lives. These times when we feel convicted in our lives and God's pruning us and we're feeling convicted about our attitude or maybe our work ethic, maybe the use of our time. Am I using my time well? As Paul says, I think it's in Ephesians chapter 5 where he says that make good use of your day because the days are evil. How many of you, the older you get, the more that makes sense, that the days are evil. And they're not in themselves evil, but, I mean, you get done with your day and you're like, where did that day go? It's evil how fast they go sometimes. Man, that time with the family was so, so good and so rich, but it went by in like 32 seconds, even though you were together for 10 hours. Do you know what I'm talking about? Time goes by so fast. And so we need to make use of our time. We need to be fruitful in those times. And that's what God is doing for us, that we may bear more fruit. Verse 8 says, our fruit bearing is what brings God glory. Isn't that a great thing? We're going to get to that more later, but isn't that a great thing? That bearing fruit is like the best thing a vine can do. It's the most exciting thing that we can do. When you see like you've done something and like, I remember one of the first Thanksgivings that it was probably more like year 8 or 9 of our marriage. And we did Thanksgiving for like 35 people in our family. It was the last big Thanksgiving we had in our first house in Bothell. And we fit everybody there. It might even been more than that. I don't remember. There was a ton of people. But I'm telling you, it was so much fun to see people sitting down and enjoying the meal that we prepared. Have you ever had that happen? I mean, it's like the fruits of your labor, right? It's just fun to see. And so bearing fruit is so much fun. But it's also the very thing that brings God glory. I love that there's a tie-in with that. I very much do. And so as we go through this thought in these early verses of chapter 15, Jesus speaks this to his disciples. Because you can imagine, every branch that bears no fruit, he cuts off. Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that will be even more fruitful. And the disciples in that moment, let's go back just a minute to this picture of the vine from the Old Testament, where it really wasn't a good story every time it was brought up. And you could almost picture them. This is the way my brain works. They're walking along, they see the vine, they're like, ugh. And Jesus says these things. He prunes them and he cuts them off. And then he speaks these words of encouragement. You are already clean because of the words I've spoken to you. You are already clean. In the Greek, it literally means that you've been pruned. You're prepared. Your vine is been prepared by God. You've been through the ringer. And the disciples are like, yeah, we know that. We've been through a lot. You have no idea what's coming. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Already clean. And then he gets into this passage that is so powerful that we're going to take a pause on right now. We'll just kind of launch it for a moment, and you're going to know why we need to pause, and then we'll jump back into this. And this word is listed 10 times in verses 4 to 10. If you have a Bible in front of you, you can look. In verses 4 to 10, this one word is mentioned 10 times. What is that word? Abide. I even found this cool picture. Isn't that a cool picture of abide? So I'm loving AI. Can I just tell you that much right now? I love AI. But with ChatGPT and with Perplexity, both AI, I went in and all I said was, spell the word abide in grapevine. And I had two great renditions. This was the one by Perplexity. I think it was just really cool. I found out I can use it for educational purposes. I don't know that I can make a t-shirt out of it without getting in big trouble. But for now, we get to enjoy this. To abide. 10 times. And this is where it's so important to look at each use of the word abide. It's a verb. And so in the Greek, verbs can tell you some really important things. They can tell you who did it. They can tell you how they did it. They can tell you with what intensity they did it. They can tell you how many times it was done. They can tell you a lot just in one word. I might have told you this before, but in Spanish you can conjugate a verb how many ways? Okay? Like 5 to 7? Really? In the Greek, the most simple word, luo, which means to loose, it's conjugated 70 ways. That's the most simple verb. You get into more complex verbs, and they can be conjugated. So it's not just o, os, on, amen, whatever. I can't remember. I haven't taken Spanish for a while. I don't remember. But it tells you kind of who did it, at least. But in the Greek, it gives you so many. So the most complex Greek verb can be conjugated 500 different ways. I love that God chose the Greek to write the New Testament in. Not just because it was the most common and most understood language as it was being passed around, but because it's so colorful. I mean, we've got like a box of 16 crayons. Greek has got like a box of 6,000 crayons. And I love that. And so as we get into this word abide, this word abide just means to remain. Some versions say remain. And the whole point in this is to abide in his love, to remain in his love, to stay in his love, to have communion with his love. Oftentimes, the things we abide in our daily life is not that. Oftentimes, we abide in disappointment. Oftentimes, we abide in what could have happened, what should have happened. When we think of God, sometimes we abide, we stay in this mindset that He's not happy with me, that I never do enough, it's never going to be enough. And we abide in the wrong things so often. And we know that's true because of what's hanging off the end of the branches. More and more science comes out of how important it is on what we dwell on, the thoughts we dwell on, and what it does to our body chemistry. It's amazing what it does to our body chemistry when we abide, when we stay on, when we focus on, when we fix our eyes on negative stuff. It just shrivels us down. Caroline Leaf, Dr. Caroline Leaf, if you haven't heard anything about her, write that name down and listen to her. Not only is she fun to listen to because she's, I think, from New Zealand, but she's really smart. She's a neuroscientist, and she spends time talking about all this stuff, and there's a bunch of people that are part of this thing anyway. It's really amazing. But the point is that what are we abiding in? What do we fix our mind on? This word used so many times. I just did a deep dive into this. For you word nerds, it's a great dive just to go into the uses of it. And so I'm actually going to include it in my letter this week. If you're not getting a weekly letter and you would like to, write down your email address at least on the connection card. Check the box on the bottom that you want to be a part of the letter. Because what I'm going to do is give you some cheat notes of what we're going to cover in a few weeks. It's really important. And I would love you to just kind of get into it even before we get there. This truth is so powerful. It's so transforming of our life, of who God is, what brings Him glory, how we've been created. It's just amazing what that one word does. And so I'm going to send out kind of some of the different verb tenses in the Greek. I'm going to send out a chunk of verses that kind of gives it a little amplified. Are you familiar with the Amplified version? Amplified version says some stuff and in parentheses give you a kind of what that word is saying. It's chunky. It's a little bit hard to read. And I even wrote down in my notes a whole Bill Amplified version. This big chunk of red in here. That's what I have slides of. So, Jim, you have life so easy today. But I want you to dig into that yourself, and then we're going to dig into that together. And these words, this message of Jesus in John 15 interplays so well. It won't even feel like we've gone back to earlier words, even after Tom teaches on verses 12 to 17, because they're so pertinent to our lives. My question for you, though, worship team, you can come on up here. My question for you this morning is, are you stuck? Do you feel like you've been stuck? Do you feel like in the midst of being stuck, you're kind of feeling a little bit of pruning? Maybe you've been fighting the pruning. The writer of Hebrews says to endure hardship as discipline. God's treating you as His kids. And that no discipline in the moment seems joyful. This is not fun. But sorrowful. But it's also sorrowful. But those who are raised by it, those who are pruned, will yield a harvest of righteousness and peace. So there's so much there that is so important for our lives. That it's been my prayer for us is that we would be hungry, that we would choose to spend time with God every day, that we would be hungry. And part of that hunger is evidenced in abiding, in staying, in remaining in our relationship with Jesus in the midst of it all. Getting through the stinking thinking of what we get stuck in and finding freedom that comes. I know that abiding can bring and bear much fruit for God's glory. But our part in that is really important. That we would make those choices, that we're not stuck. We're not stuck in making bad choices, but we would trust Him. We believe Him. And we walk in life.